If you love liberty, declare your independence by signing the Shire Society Declaration at shiresociety.com.
No, so we have keynote speaker Caryn Harlos. And Caryn, you have some handouts. Have those already been passed out, or are you employing someone to do that?
I am voluntolding Steve.
Excellent. So Steve Sheets will be passing things out, and while he does that, let me tell you about this wonderful, wonderful woman. Caryn Harlos is a transplant to Colorado from Florida, and unlike our featured lunch speaker, Lily Tang Williams, Caryn does not currently have plans to move to New Hampshire. Hopefully we can convince her.
Come on, do it!
Like pioneers, she decided to go out west to find a new life. She's a practicing paralegal with over 20 years of experience, and she's also a Christian author with one published work that has been used as a reference text in a class at Liberty University. She is currently the Region 1 representative to the Libertarian National Committee. Region 1 is the following states: Alaska, Arizona, Colorado, Hawaii, Kansas, Montana, Utah, Washington, and Wyoming. She's also the communications director for LP Colorado. Is that still accurate?
Nope, I resigned in March.
She resigned from that a month ago after I already made up the booklet. She is still the chair of the Libertarian Party Historical Committee, and she holds several other positions on other committees, including the chair of the National Platform Committee, where we have a meeting in a couple of weeks in lovely Columbus, Ohio. And if I remember anything about Ohio, the couple times I drove through, I need to take a sandwich. She is a prolific volunteer and has an extensive knowledge about the history of the Libertarian Party. Caryn Harlos.
Yay! I get the last one.
All right, I figured it would be easier for me to hold this, otherwise it was going to be a borderline porno exercise here with me trying to lean up to this.
Okay.
Daryl described almost everything. I did, though, I have to be putting on and off my old lady glasses. I did resign from the Libertarian Party of Colorado last month because I'm focusing on my race for the LNC. I am running for LNC secretary, and I'd be happy to speak with anyone about that. Because the funny thing is, exactly with this inflection, this is usually what people say to me. Why do you want to be secretary? You know, it's always with that inflection right there, and I'd be more than happy to answer that question for anybody. And let's see. Yes, there is multiple other committees, including the Advertising, Publication, and Review Committee. So yes, you can blame me for that post on the Satan Gate post. Yes, okay. No eggs, please. No tomatoes either. And the presentation I'm going to be giving to you guys tonight, I haven't given it in about a year, so you're probably going to get some of the raw, unfiltered, not quite so polished, but I usually do better with that. I've given this presentation before in Arizona, Colorado, Montana, New Mexico, Washington, Alaska, Oregon, and some portions of it on the Tom Woods show, which a lot of people had heard. So now it will also be in New Hampshire. I believe I'll be giving a variation of it in the Unconvention as well in Nebraska. Alrighty. How to start? Well, for one thing, I'm going to tell you something that happens every time I give this presentation. It's like the magic t-shirt that I told you about earlier. This is almost the magic presentation. I have found that each time I give this, there is one person that walks out of it like completely nutty about the subject and turns into a mini-me, which is great. It ignites a fire for our party history. It's not everybody's cup of tea, but when you find out it's yours, you kind of go a little insane about it. And I will say, please clap many times, so you can clap as well. So that, I don't know who that will be, but I guarantee someone here will leave a bit changed because you'll learn something you didn't know before. And I like to start this a certain way because the first time I gave it, my husband was in the audience, He's the chair of the Libertarian Party of Colorado because he wanted to see me at some point, so that's why I took that position. And then I resigned the Party of Colorado, which is pretty funny. That was a good trick right there. So when he first heard me give this, I started out by saying, you know what, I have to tell you something. We're libertarians here, no judgment, right? I'm having an affair. And his head shot up so fast because he thought he heard everything I said before, because we worked together at home in the home office. He ended up getting that office outside the home because I wouldn't shut up. This is all day, libertarian all the time. But this affair that I'm having, it's fiery and it's passionate like all of good affairs should be. But my dirty little secret is that it's not an affair with a person. I'm one of those people, I became a libertarian in an unusual way. Nobody taught me, nobody spoke to me, nobody handed me pamphlets, nothing like that. I was arguing on Facebook. I think you're going to start to hear that Facebook's a very common theme in my life, but I was arguing on Facebook when I was a conservative Republican, and I was getting angry with some people who were promoting putting spikes under overpasses so that homeless people couldn't sleep there, and I just was like, that's insane. And these were Christian Republican people, which really just got me. And after and I didn't have pink hair at that time, and that becomes important in a minute. It becomes important because now everyone just assumes like I'm a liberal because of the hair, which is really, really, really funny. But so I was just saying to them, that's terrible. And then they started calling me libtard and all other kinds of things and a liberal. And of course, at the time, being an evangelical Christian conservative, the worst thing in the world you could call me was a liberal. So I freaked out, pulled the fact out of my ass, and basically said, no, I'm more of a libertarian, because I heard the word somewhere and I thought it sounded cool. And then afterwards I realized that I did just shoot my mouth off and I had no idea what I just said. It could be something really terrible. So I went to the website, I read the platform. After I got through the preamble and the statement of principles, I didn't need to read anything else. The next web page tab I opened up was the Colorado Secretary of State, and I changed my voter registration on the spot.
Woo!
What's more remarkable about that is I wasn't politically involved before. Even though I was a registered Republican, it was a rhino. I come from a very fundamentalist Christian background. In my area, if you were Christian, you were Republican. That was just the way it was. I grew up Democrat. When I converted to Christianity, I registered Republican. That's just what you do. But I wasn't really involved. I probably hadn't voted in 10 years. I used to take great joy out of, we'd get the ballots in Florida and I just throw them right in the circular filing, and I just got a big kick out of that. Except for I did save the one with the hanging chads on it. That's got to be worth money at some point. So that's a little bit of a different story. My poor husband, because I moved out to Colorado to marry him. We are one of those medium-line people. And so he thought he married this nice, quiet, conservative Christian girl that didn't even care about politics. He comes home from lunch break, and I'm like, I just changed my voter registration. He's like, to what? And it was, and then that shirt. Then I saw the ad for the shirt, and it was all downhill from then. So, that's why, for one reason, the statement of principles of the party is so important to me. It literally did convert me. That and the preamble. Whoever wrote that preamble, it's poetry if you haven't read it in a while. And what I hope to do today is impart some of that passion that I have for these words. And I'm sorry, my voice is a little of a sexy smoker's voice, but I'm normally not this raspy. But I hope to impart some of that passion to you. And if I can't do that, I at least want to educate you a bit on the beautiful history of our party and to get some understanding of the ideology that we stand for and how it has evolved. But more importantly, what this means for you today. It's very easy to say, well, something happened 30 years ago, that doesn't matter now. No, it actually means a lot to you today. So how the statement of principles currently reads, it's up here on the banner. Most people read it once and haven't paid any attention to it. But I would like to read it aloud, and I would like you to actually listen to it. Very few of you probably have. And then consider that this version actually was in 1974, but something substantially similar was written in 1972. And just think back. It was so revolutionary for the time. I think we take for granted our extreme dedication to freedom and don't realize that this really was massively important. So I'd ask you to listen. I could get really weird and ask you to close your eyes and bow your heads, but I won't do that. I could, but I won't.
You could, but we wouldn't.
Yes. So, here we go. We, the members of the Libertarian Party, challenge the cult of the omnipotent state and defend the rights of the individual. We hold that all individuals have the right to exercise sole dominion over their own lives and have the right to live in whatever manner they choose, so long as they do not forcibly interfere with the equal right of others to live in whatever manner they choose. Governments throughout history have regularly operated on the opposite principle, that the state has the right to dispose of the lives of individuals and the fruits of their labor. Even within the United States, all political parties other than our own grant to government the right to regulate the lives of individuals and to seize the fruits of their labor without their consent. We, on the contrary, deny the right of government to do any of these things and hold that where governments exist, they must not violate the rights of any individual, namely, 1, the right to life. Accordingly, we support the prohibition of the initiation of physical force against others. 2, the right to liberty of speech and action. Accordingly, we oppose all attempts by government to abridge the freedom of speech and press, as well as government censorship in any form. And 3, the right to property. Accordingly, we oppose all government interference with private property, such as confiscation, nationalization, and eminent domain, and support the prohibition of robbery, trespass, fraud, and misrepresentation. Since governments, when instituted, must not violate individual rights, we oppose all interference by government in the areas of voluntary and contractual relations among individuals. People should not be forced to sacrifice their lives and property for the benefit of others. They should be left free by government to deal with one another as free traders. And the resultant economic system, the only one compatible with the protection of individual rights, is the free market. Please clap. So, that is the foundation of our party. And I hope hearing it again stirred something within you. To me, you know, it certainly does. I know I have all these little quips, and I do talk like this all the time, but I did joke at one point that I was going to get the whole statement of principles tattooed on my ass, but I lost 50 pounds, so now there's not room. So I've been doing a bit of libertarian archaeology on these words and on this document because it impacted me in a big way. And it's a work in progress. I learn new things about it every month probably, and probably someone in this room who's been in the party a while will have some more nuggets to give me to my trove of knowledge. I want to be accurate and complete, and I think this is a long overdue project. When I began to work my way back into time to learn about how the party formed and our particular, unique, beautiful ideology, I discovered that important pieces of our history have been at worst obscured and miscast deliberately, or at best, just sorely neglected, and that we're in danger of quite literally losing a part of our party history. The fact is, a lot of the people that were there in 1972 aren't with us. I mean, David Nolan passed away in 2010. Slowly, we're losing this. We're losing this, and we need to care about this today. So I took it upon myself that this would be my project, and I'm going to dispel some of the myths that have arisen about the Statement of Principles. So we're going to get into a little bit of history here. It won't be too much, hopefully. There's no such thing as too much for me on this, but the first convention of the party took place in Denver, yay, Colorado, in 1972. And it was a very diverse lot of people. It was minarchists, anarchists, a lot of Randians, which you don't see too much today, but there was an awful lot of them then. Classical liberals, and then like every possible combination in between, because you know how libertarians are. And they were all united, though, around one idea, the idea of radical individualism. Some of you may have thought I would have said the radical idea of reducing government or whatever. That really isn't it. If you take a look at the statement of principles, the first thing it talks about is the individual. So libertarianism is the idea of radical individualism. And yes, I did use the word radical because it is. I'm not using that in the party factional sense, I'm just using that in the political reality sense. We were founded as a revolutionary movement. It was a peaceful revolution without a doubt, but it is a revolution. Any current perspective that does not come to grips with what the early party actually said and actually stood for is cutting off the branch upon which it still sits. And make no doubt about it, libertarianism remains a radical, revolutionary idea if we're going to be true to its actual guiding philosophy. So at this time, some party founders were very concerned that entrenched interests and cults of personality would come in. And they invariably do. We see that in our state parties. And that principles might be lost or watered down through expediency or petty power struggles and cliques. And that would turn this revolutionary idea into something less than, something also tried, something also ran. Make us a quaint footnote in history. I think they'd be very proud that we're still here decades later. And D. Frank Robinson, who some of you may have heard, but most of you probably haven't, and that's a shame. He's one of the party founders, and he's still alive in Oklahoma. Fantastic man. Had the opportunity to see him just a few weeks ago. Well, D. Frank and Ed Carlson, who some of you may also have heard, devised a plan to protect the party. And this is the way they described it, that they would embed an article of faith into the soul of the party. And this article of faith could not be altered without a super majority and a super quorum. This idea was approved by the original Constitution, Bylaws, and Rules Committee. And this is what D. Frank Robinson had told me. He realized that doing something like that was not good parliamentary form in any stretch of the imagination. And you know how we feel about good parliamentary form. That is a whole other subject. But he realized that. But it's only not good parliamentary form when it's the survival of the organization qua organization that's paramount. And that isn't what was important to them. He determined that an existentially ideological organization that fervently holding that the survival of the principles was the sine qua non of the party. Not the mere existence of some hollow shell that still bore the name, but had little resemblance to the founding ideas from which it sprung. So Robinson described it to me that the intent was, and I love his words here, he said the intent was to plant a rhetorical stake in the ground with a tether, the statement of principles, a terse one-page document declaring to all coming after us, this is the anchor and the lifeline. Do not tread too far from it or you may perish. If you stay close, you may eventually prosper for your efforts. And that is what the 1972 convention did. They passed a Declaration of Principles. They originally called it a preamble, which gets a bit confusing when you're reading party history, but it was, in fact, a statement of principles. And what they did to make sure that it was the tether in the ground, they secured its survival by demanding that it could only be amended by 7/8 vote of registered delegates at convention. I think sometimes we skip over that really well too. Now that you were just at a convention, I think maybe you will see the import of that. 7/8 of registered delegates at convention. Now, people hear that, and you could be very, very optimistic, like Jim Carrey in Dumb and Dumber with the beautiful lady. Do I have a chance? Well, 1 in a million. I've got a chance. No, you don't have a chance. The fact is, by saying 7/8 of registered delegates at convention, it's the parliamentary equivalent of saying, too bad, so sad, it's impossible. That's basically what they were saying, and that was by design. And it's not just a vote of 7/8. It's worse than that. It's 7/8 of registered delegates, which means every single person who registered at the convention has to be in the room, and it would be 7/8 of them. You can't have any number at the bar. which is where a lot of libertarians end up during business, or in the bathroom. They can't be anywhere else. You have to have them all and still get 7/8. It's impossible. It's absolutely impossible. So that is the super majority and the super quorum. I don't think it's ever happened at any national convention that 7/8 of registered delegates have ever been on the floor at one time. So is it possible? Yes, I guess so. Is it likely? No. And that was the intention. They figured if you did accomplish the impossible and got 1/8 of the delegates who still believed in the foundational vision of the party, then game was over, nothing you could do. And if you can't at least get 1/8 of delegates to stand on principles, it doesn't matter because the party as founded was already dead, and that vote was just the public declaration of its demise. These initial founders realized, excuse me, nothing, like liquor will cure it all. Okay, that's much better. So these initial founders realized that this was a very serious step. I mean, it really was. That was pretty intense. They basically knew, excuse me, maybe liquor doesn't cure all. My world was just rocked. It was basically building a vault, stepping inside, and destroying the key. That's basically what they did. And the statement of principles passed unanimously at the first convention. I don't think I've ever seen anything ever pass unanimously by a bunch of libertarian delegates. There was about 80 of them. It wasn't like 2 people. I don't think you could pass something unanimously with 2 people. But apparently they did it with 80.
So that of us there will still vote no to.
Yeah, that was a demonstration of the miraculous. And Daryl, you're going to need to keep track of time for me because I don't do that. But they put in, thank you, they put in an escape hatch. They said, let's think about this for 2 years. You know, we're all here at our first convention, we're all full of ourselves, we're full of piss and vinegar, you know, maybe in 2 years we'll think better of this. So they said that after 2 years at the 1974 convention, it could be amended by a 2/3 vote, and then the 7/8 rule would lock into place. So it's important to know what happened at both the 1972 and the 1974 conventions, and how we ended up with the document we have today. So I did give you a handout. It wasn't mimeograph though, because that would have been nice to have that smell on. You young people don't know what I'm talking about, but you older people know. That was awesome. I used to love getting sent by the teacher to do the mimeograph. Roberts, let's go aside. Okay, so if you take a look at Article 1, that is, excuse me, that is the article that embedded and solidified the idea that there would be foundational principles of the party. And particularly, it established the primacy of place of the to-be-created statement of principles. When that article was written, the statement of principles wasn't written yet. So they decided before it was even written, we're going to have one and it's going to be protected. Interestingly, because you've been at enough conventions to know that we like changing things just to change it. It's like some of the bylaws amendments. What? So figure 2 is the current bylaws. And what's really remarkable about it is that the content of this article hasn't substantially changed, except for the deletion of the 1974 2/3 language. And it moves some language around regarding amending the platform. So this has been a constant strain. I'm going to say something that sometimes gets people a bit upset, and I'm not saying that in my joking way, I'm saying it in absolutely my serious way. Anyone, and I hear this all the time, anyone who claims that Libertarian Party libertarianism cannot be defined quite simply is out of their tree. They're either ignorant of or ignoring, I prefer to think ignorant of rather than purposely ignoring our bylaws. Our bylaws define Libertarian Party libertarianism. It says we are defined by the statement of principles. That's the benchmark. There's often talk of the libertarian big tent. Let me first, before anyone gets triggered, I do believe in it. You might just think I didn't by what I just said, but I actually think that term is abused. we do have a big tent that can accommodate a wide plethora of views, just like the initial convention had all those different views. And basically, the point of the Libertarian Party is that anyone who's willing to go in our direction, even if it's just 10 steps, should be fully willing and welcome as an active and valued member, as long as they're willing to certify our membership pledge. But the tent of essential Libertarian Party beliefs is the Statement of Principles. The organization actually exists in its own. I know it's not a person or anything like that, but it survives us. We could all be gone and there still would be a Libertarian Party. So the party itself as its corporate entity, this is what it believes. We don't have to agree with it as individuals 100%, but to say that the party does not have a set standard for its libertarianism is completely wrong. And people say that all the time because I don't believe that. That's fine. You're free to personally disagree. I personally disagree. Some of you might go boo-hiss after this, but I'm pro-life. The party's not pro-life. I understand that. And whenever I say it, I say, that's me, not the party. The party is pro-choice. I don't ever fool anybody with that. But that just goes to show that Ms. Statement of Principles herself disagrees with the party. There's probably maybe a few other things. I have some heresies. Don't worry. So future protections were put into place, however. They were kind of paranoid in the beginning. We're like that in Colorado, you should read our bylaws, but further protections were put in place to challenge any future platform plank or policy which might contradict the Statement of Principles. And this was done by establishing the Judicial Committee. So the Judicial Committee has been in there from the beginning, and really its main job at that time was to judge everything by the Statement of Principles. It has, like barnacles over the years, gotten more duties, including apparently disaffiliating Oregon, but that wasn't its original purpose. D. Frank Robinson, I'm just killing Daryl here. D. Frank Robinson came up with it, and its purpose was to be the watchdog over the Statement of Principles. And you can see that in your handouts. Figure 3 talks about the initial purpose of the Judicial Committee. And that purpose still remains today. And it's expanded to include resolutions as well. So if the LNC resolved, the state is wonderful and we love it, the Judicial Committee could strike that down as being in contradiction to the Statement of Principles. Yes, please. And also at the same time these were passed, this was made an absolute condition of affiliation with the National Party. I'm one of those affiliate rights person, if we're going to do that whole thing with comparing us to the government, boo-hiss. I actually think the power of our party lies with the affiliates and not with the LNC, and that you should give the LNC as little power.
Thank you.
And I can tell you that because I'm on the LNC and I've seen how the sausage is made, and I don't want to eat the sausage out of it.
I don't want your sausage.
So, take back your power. I say that to everyone. I won't preach, but please. The initial platform committee in '72 was chaired by Mr. Pip Boyles, who I think we located, that we'll be doing an interview with, who set to work to write the Statement of Principles. The initial result was deemed to be unsatisfactory, not in content but in style, because it had all the hallmarks of a document written by committee, and you all just know how wonderful those documents can be. So it was recommended that submissions be taken from a group of people who would write it individually, so it would be more stylistically coherent. So multiple versions of the Statement of Principles were written. And then they were debating, do we write our platform first or do we adopt our Statement of Principles? And a lot of insightful floor comment was had regarding that you can't have planks unless you know what it is they're supposed to be about. And if you're wondering how I know this, It's because D. Frank Robinson had in his basement the reel-to-reel tapes of the 1972 convention.
Wow.
And we converted those, and I listened to them in very, very bad quality. But after cleaning them up a bit, you can still hear a great deal. Susan Nolan was chair. It was wonderful. It was wild. And during the middle of that debate, Tony Nathan was there. I don't know how many of you have heard her voice. She's just wonderful. She had the most adorable voice. And she got up, I'm assuming she got up because I'm envisioning this in my head, but she got up and she said with that wonderful voice, like in the most strident voice possible, "We will be the laughingstock of the world if we adopt planks without first specifying our principles." And too much uproarious, applause at that time. So the delegates decided to consider the 5 proposals, which are listed in your handouts as figures, I think it's 6 through 10, if I numbered them right. If I didn't, you can figure out. These are the draft statement of principles proposals. Now, what's remarkable about this is this wasn't captured anywhere in party history until I listened to that 1972 tape and transcribed these proposals. They were lost. So to me, that was precious enough. But if you read through some of them, you should, at this point, thank whatever superpower, if you believe in any, that some of these didn't get adopted, because some of them are, woo, yes, they're very interesting. Very Randian, like you could think, like one of these, oh my goodness, it sounded like, Ayn Rand wrote it herself, talks about man is not a sacrificial animal, and I'm just like, ooh, Atlas Shrugged. So there's the 5. It's quite interesting. The proposal of John Hosper's was the one chosen with some modifications, and you can see the Hosper's proposal in number 12. And I'm going there as well. And I'm going to diverge with a story here that I hope you guys will like. So this is a photocopied version of the original one that was at 1972 that the historical committee had this really bad, crappy scan of. And I thought that was cool enough. So one day, I happened to be cruising eBay for Libertarian Party stuff, and I don't normally do that. I normally cruise for shoes, but I was cruising for Libertarian Party stuff.
Don't lie to us.
And
Stitch Fix?
well, yes, Stitch Fix, that's different. But I'm scrolling and I see a document that looks just like this, purporting to be the original. And I was like, holy, no, this can't possibly be it. So I got out this old mimeograph copy or whatever it was, and I compared it, and I'm like, holy damn, that is it. The handwriting, everything is the same, except for there was a new coffee stain in the middle of it. But other than that, it looked identical. And nobody knew where this copy had come from anyway. It'd been around forever, and it was of such a quality, it was like old Xerox, quality. So we were super, super excited, me and all my historical friends, so we started bidding on it, and at the last minute it got sniped away for, I think, $450. Ooh. And much, much heartbreak ensued, but we consoled each other going, well, at least, it exists. Somebody must love it. And we wrote the seller, tried to get her to donate it, whatever. After a few days of heartbreak, we found out it was another friend of ours that bid on it at the last minute. He was bidding against us. We probably could have gotten it for $100. So it ended up being $450. I should have brought it with me, but I'm so paranoid about traveling with it. So we got it, bought by a gentleman in Washington. And he got a hold of the seller after he got the document, which came in this flimsy, crappy envelope that he about had a heart attack when it came to his house. But he got in touch with her and he asked her, where did you get this? And she said, well, my parents were some of the founders of the Libertarian Party of California, the Gottliebs. Some of you may know them. And they both passed away recently, and I'm cleaning out their home. And I saw on the wall was this really crappy Xeroxed photo of Ayn Rand in a frame. And she's like, why? Like, it's not even a real portrait. It was black and, it was awful. So she took it down, going, were they just getting a little loony in their old age? What was the deal here? She took it down, took it apart, and behind the picture in the frame was the original statement of principles.
Oh
That sounds like I made that up. That's something you read in a story, but that's exactly what happened. So we got it, it's at Washington now, it's at my house, we've got it framed. It is going to go to the National Party donation for their office after NOLA. So basically, it's this amazing story of how it's coming home after decades and decades and decades. If you're interested in that, Last LP News has a story about it that I wrote. I think that's remarkable. I think that's absolutely remarkable. Okie dokie. So the Hosforce proposal was passed. The delegates were given 2 years to consider. So in 1974, they got together and they could scrap it all together and start over. They could tweak it, they could do whatever they want. So what did they do? Before we answer what they did, you need to know what happened between 1972 and 1974. And I am going to shock you guys like I did about Facebook. So, I'm sorry, this is the real world. You guys gotta hear about it. There were divisions forming in the party. There were divisions and arguments.
No way.
I know.
Oh, no, libertarians argue?
It was. I know, sorry.
Say it isn't so.
Counselors are waiting outside. So divisions were forming in the party, and at that time it was between the majority minarchist view and Randians who kind of sided with them, and the minority anarchist view. And they were threatening, not any one person, but the division itself was threatening to split the party, the very young party. And they both argued from fundamental libertarian principles. So an agreement was reached at the 1974 convention in Dallas between the delegates that while the party would be working towards a society free from the initiation of force and coercion, that the party itself would take no ultimate endgame position on the necessity of the existence of the state, and that settling this issue as an official policy would be reserved until such time as a minimal state had been achieved. Now, notice this was just the party. That doesn't mean a member couldn't take a position. Obviously, a member could have whatever position they want. But if you go through party documents, you'll notice there's no ultimate position taken on the necessity of the state. And that is by design. Now, some people claim that an agreement was reached that this neutrality would also be reflected in the party platform. We'll get to that. That's true and not true at the same time. It's Schrodinger's agreement. I'm full of it tonight, but I should drink some more. So this agreement, some of you may have heard this is probably starting to come together for you now, is what is called the Dallas Accord. So if you've heard that phrase before and didn't know what it was, well, here it was. And there's a lot of false information about the Dallas Accord, most of it promulgated by Wikipedia. But there's a lot of false information about it. And if you know a little bit about it, what I'm going to tell you today, you're going to be probably surprised because it's going to be different from what you knew. So there's a lot of mythology, false history, whatever. And I'm really astonished that, as far as I know, I'm the first person to ever do any significant pushback to this. And untangling this history is why I'm standing here now. And here's the first common false fact, or fake news, we could call it. It's often said that the Dallas Accord was entirely informal. It was a gentleman's agreement between the delegates in 1974, and not binding upon us today, and that its only use is as an interesting historical oddity that has absolutely no relevance or authority upon us today. And that is categorically and absolutely bullshit. There's no other way to put it. And how can I say that? Well, it's disproven several ways. As you heard before, I'm a paralegal. I used to do a lot of fraud cases, a lot of document examination cases. So I'm used to coming at things through document examination. So this is both disproven, this fact that it was informal and not binding upon us today, through both witness testimony and forensic document examination. Now, unfortunately, many of the people involved at that time, they're gone. John Hospers, David Nolan. But D. Frank Robinson, the man who was the architect of the 7 ACE rule, is still alive. And I came to my conclusions before checking it with him. He read it and goes, you nailed it. You nailed it, absolutely right. That you got it. So that gave me some confidence. He also gave me a bit of trivia. He said in 1972, he proposed 3/4 to change it in 1974. David Nolan said, that's a bit too high, let's make it 2/3. If D. Frank had won the 3/4, things would have been a lot different today. So David Nolan had a lot of wisdom there. Now, there's been some early witnesses that differ on my account as well. That kind of happens with witnesses. Everyone sees things a little bit different. So I'm not saying that there isn't anybody who would disagree with me. So I think at this point you have to take it all together and go to the documents. The documents don't lie. The documents don't have an agenda. The documents don't have a faulty memory. The only thing that will start to disprove the documents is finding more documents, which could happen, but so far not. And I've been through the whole storage thing. So there's nothing there so far. So what does this evidence say? Can I prove to you my claim, which is completely contrary to Wikipedia, that there was any formalization of the Dallas Accord? And I can. We have an artifact from that convention. That artifact rings through history, and it cuts through this fog of decades. And what is that artifact? That artifact is the amendments that were made to the Statement of Principles at the 1974 convention. The 1974 convention is when the Dallas Accord was made and the Statement of Principles was amended. In order to believe that the Dallas Accord was not formalized, you have to believe that the delegates reached an agreement on a certain subject and then edited the pretty much uneditable document in the exact same way as that agreement, but they weren't related. And if you believe that, okay, that's all I can say. Believe that if you want, and then we can talk about chemtrails, I suppose. So we're going to turn to these amendments now so I can prove my case. If you go to page 10 of the handout, the first thing you'll see is the 1972 Statement of Principles. This is what was authored by John Hospers and passed. If you go to the next page, it's the 1974 Statement of Principles. On cursory glance, they look pretty similar, same number of paragraphs. You probably wouldn't even know any difference just glancing over it. But, you know, OCD that I am, on page 12, I took the liberty of highlighting the changes that, in fact, were made. The changes that are blue are simply style and grammar changes. We were very forward-thinking. We decided that just having he or masculine pronouns wasn't good. So we changed them to they or gender neutral wherever we could. And that's most of the style and grammar changes. Also, the green is the gender neutrality. So between those two, that's nothing significant. The yellow changes are the Dallas Accord changes. The Dallas Accord changes give nods to anarchy and also makes the party take no ultimate position on the existence of the state. And the pink changes are substantive. Some people argue they have to do with the Dallas Accord, others don't. Because I couldn't definitively defend that they were, I took those out. One of the most interesting changes in there, though, is that we went from saying laissez-faire capitalism to the free market. I really would like to know why we did that. That might be a future research project for me. I tend to think it's because that most people didn't know what that meant, and free market was just easier. But I could be wrong. There could be some deep thing in there. All right. So looking at those changes is where I proved my case. And it's actually quite startling. I had already started to come to this conclusion, and I already knew some of the changes, but when I actually did the highlighting, I was literally shocked by it. When it jumped out at me, I'm like, oh my God, it was actually far more deep changes. I had thought it was just the addition of a word here and there. You know, those funny phrases like government when instituted, government where it exists. And I thought that was the end of it, which was pretty cool. I mean, those were nods to anarchy right there. If you haven't figured out, yes, I am an anarchist. Yay, please God. But it's actually, those are the least significant of the changes. Absolutely the least significant of the changes. So, if we take a look now, going to the Dallas Accord changes, the 1972 version said, the sole function of government is the protection of rights of the individual, and government has only one legitimate function, the protection of individual rights. And most of us, including anarchists, probably didn't have too much of a problem with that. I wouldn't have. But what they did to make it explicit, the 1974 version says, where governments exist, they must not violate the rights of any individual, leading to the possibility that they might not exist, and that they don't have to exist. And governments, when instituted, must not violate individual rights. Again, that's called Dallas Accord language, you hear it all the time. But where things get much more interesting is that a subtle but very profound additional change was made. And this will become even more relevant when we discuss the relationship of the Statement of Principles to the platform. It's that the 1972 Statement of Principles assigned a positive role to the government. I think we understand the significance of positive and negative when we talk about rights. We've got positive rights and negative rights. Same thing here. The 72 Statement of Principles assigned a positive role to the government, meaning that the government was to do something. It was to protect rights. The 1974 Statement of Principles assigns only a negative role to the government. It must not do something. It must not violate rights. And that is very profound. It turned the whole thing on its head. Some people now, I'm going to drag in some other stuff you might know. We're going to get back to this positive negative thing and why that's so important, but I think a lot of you are seeing immediately how important that is. There's some people who will try to make the case that the Dallas Accord was breached during the wholesale platform deletion at the 2006 Portland Convention. Story to tell you about the Portland Convention though. Quick aside, that's going to be my next research project. Most of those votes passed by under 1%. Those votes were never audited, which shocks the hell out of me. And it wasn't a secret ballot. So I have the ballots from 2006, and I found at least 3 votes that were recorded absolutely wrong. So there's a good question as to whether that actually passed. But that's 10 years ago. I mean, one guy, Samuel Lawrence, you know, wrote the big screed in California against those changes. He's on record as voting yes to delete. No frickin' way. So was George Squires, the guy who wrote the platform that got deleted. Don't think so. So was Barry Hess. I gotta get in touch with Hancock though, because I think he's on there as well. But that could have gone either way. Perhaps there were votes that were no, that, you know, were opposite. I'm not alleging any hanky-panky. I'm just alleging mistakes got made. And when you have a ballot that is such a razor-thin margin at a convention in which the total delegate count was less than our quorum at the other convention, there is reason to doubt exactly what happened there. But the other thing is, today it's painted that the 2006 platform deletions were some kind of anti-radical purge. That's how it's painted today. That is also incorrect. In fact, I'm going to tell you something shocking that might get me, well, I already quit the Radical Caucus, so they can't throw me out. If I were there in 2006, I probably would have voted to delete. That should tell you right there that this wasn't an anti-radical thing. If you guys are familiar with the history of the platform, we had a great platform in 2002. You guys may have thought it was a little too long, didn't like that it mentioned, you know, the asteroids and the Lagrange points, but I thought it was pretty awesome. But then in 2004, they decided, and it was all in good faith, but it was horrible, but it was all in good faith, that they would create an accordion-style platform. And what that was is they would state, I'm going to have the terminology a little wrong, but you'll get the idea. It said something like the problem, the principle, the transition, and like made it even longer and absolutely impossible to amend at convention. And what happened is that most of the people in 2006 sat down and was like, holy crap, there's no way we can fix this. The only way it can be fixed is to throw the whole damn thing out. We did that in Colorado a few years ago. We had that accordion platform. And you wanted to prove that it can never be amended because it's too much of a nightmare. In Colorado, and our platform 2 years ago, we were still calling for the legalization of marijuana, interesting, and gay marriage. So it just goes to show that people take a look at that and are like, run away, nothing you could do with it. So 2004 platform is more the reason why 2006 happened. It wasn't some kind of anti-radical purge. I would say though, from that point on though, the platform committee was taken over by a different voice. Whether you like it or not depends upon your point of view. I'm not giving any judgment. But 2006 is not what you heard. They call it the Portland Massacre because we like being very, very dramatic as libertarians, but that really isn't what it was. I actually think it was a good thing they got rid of that 2004 Franken platform was just horrible.
Could I just say, it was Carl Milstead.
Yeah, well, he led the Reform Caucus.
He had no plan to substitute for anything. He just convinced everybody to get rid of it. He had no plan for what was going to happen after that.
I'm good friends with Chuck Moll anyway. So some people say the Dallas Accord was a bridge then because that long platform was gotten rid of. And because it was a bridge then, it has no effect on us today. Okay, that assumes that the Dallas Accord said that the platform could never say such and such. And it doesn't, the Dallas Accord, if they had that agreement, that was informal because you can't bind future delegates to that. But in reality, it's functionally impossible to interpret the platform as saying the state is required. Why? Because our bylaws say that the platform can never contradict the statement of principles. Therefore, any reading of the platform which gives it a contradictory reading to the statement of principles is de facto invalid. So it doesn't matter. The platform could say whatever it wants. It has to be interpreted congruently with the statement of principles, or it's an invalid plank per our bylaws. So let's see here. I started going off on my, because that's where I just get going. All right. There's a phrase in our current platform that often gets used as a bludgeon against the people who are no state libertarians. There's a phrase that says, government exists to protect the rights of every individual, including life, liberty, and property. And some people will interpret that to mean that government must exist. It can't, because the statement of principles already rules that out. So it can only consistently be interpreted to mean that if there's to be governance, which is all government is, I'm going to shock you, I'm an anarchist, I'm against the state. I'm not against government. I'm a big fan of government, actually. Government is not the state. I hate the state. So it's interpreted, the only way you can interpret it in conjunction with the statement of principles is to mean that if there's going to be governance, and governance is the justified use of force, it can only be used defensively and cannot violate rights in its execution. And that should be something that minarchists and anarchists should have absolutely no problem affirming together. But one thing that did happen that's true is in prior platforms it used to say the only role of existing government is to. And that got omitted from the plank in 2008. So if there wasn't an informal agreement not to omit that existing word, then okay, that was breached, but that was informal. Because it's in the statement of principles. But I will say, I think deletion of that word existing creates much confusion and rancor, and that we should go back to using that language in our platform. It's in the statement of principles, so it's not like you hid it when you took it out of the platform, and all that happens is that new people who sign up, who don't know to read the two in conjunction, feel like they were sold a bill of goods. When you say to them, that's not what that means, they feel like we lied to them. So I do think that language needs to go back into the platform. And you want to know what? It will solve a million battles. That battle is just so stupid, as far as I'm concerned. The anarchist-minarchist battle is just completely stupid. So when it talks about the proper role, and it says existing government. You know, they talk about this revolutionary breach. Obviously, governments do exist today. We might be anarchists, but we're not delusional. It obviously exists today. So you do have to deal with the world as it exists today. So all of that now should come together, and hopefully you're starting to see that this has deep implications for the factional battles within our party. I like to say I'm post-factional because the whole thing starts to drive me crazy. If one is a minarchist, you can't simply point to rights protection and say that is what the state does or what the state must do. All ideological issues surrounding the state, at least according to our statement of principles, must center around proving that the state does not violate any rights. And that is basically the heart of the little state, no state dispute. Anarchists say that the state cannot protect rights without violating rights. Minarchists disagree and say it's all defensive. And both people, sorry, I'm probably going to anger everyone now at this point. I could argue both sides. You're both arguing from some foundational libertarian principles. And at this point, the state is screwing so much up, and we are so far away, that to argue about that, you just drink bleach. Because don't even get me going. And I noticed that a lot of other people use the popular little illustration that Harry Brown used, which I love. And I don't only use it with minarchists and anarchists, but with classical liberals and anybody wanting more liberty. Anyone wanting even the tiniest bit more liberty. And that is that we are all on the same train headed northward. And that some of us will get off sooner than others. And some of us will take it to the very end. Some of the people who thought they were going to take it to the very end might see the stop right before and go, this looks pretty damn nice. Because I often say, if we achieved a minarchy, I'd find a new hobby. It might not even be worth it. So, I do think that that analogy is very good. But I have to tell you, that analogy recently is being denied by a certain people. I'm not going to say a faction because it goes all the way around. By certain people within the party. And I think that's one of the most dangerous things that can happen is to start to deny that. And let me tell you how they deny it. They say, well, you know, if we're a minarchist, I'm just going to use minarchist, anarchist, but you could put in any divide here. If we're a minarchist, you know, we're going to New York. Well, that's probably, well, whatever, they're both liberal states, who cares? Minarchists, you're going to New York and you anarchists are going to California. We're not even going in the same direction. It's completely different directions. No, it isn't. If you're going to parse it that far, are you then going to say classical liberals are going where? To Colorado? Please don't. You know, it's just like, you can't do that. We are all directionally on the road to more freedom, less government. So if you, I just really, never mind. You got it. All right. So if we're to move forward and include as many people as possible, we have to resist that urge. We have to, when we're including people, be directional. Are you headed in the same direction? But when we're being directional and including as many people as possible, we cannot deny or ignore our destination. And the destination is, at a minimum, I'm losing my crown, I have to have my tiara. The destination is, at a minimum, at least a minarchy, and at a maximum, potentially an anarchy. So we can't deny that destination, but we shouldn't be throwing people out who just want to go a little bit less. You know, when we get there, we might all like it. So the destination is a world set free in our lifetimes, as the platform says. So now, what does this mean for us today? I think I already gave you some practical application, but I'm going to tie it in a little more that I hope you understand more our platform and how the two interchange. First, the platform. It's misunderstood. The platform was never intended to be our ideology itself. The platform was intended to be transient and potentially transitional, meaning giving steps, not necessarily the end game. The end game hard-coded into our bylaws is the statement of principles. This is the hard line, this is the tether, not the platform. Everything will be judged to the platform, to the statement of principles, not the platform. And what this does when you have your hard stand right here, it allows your platform to be a little less, hardcore. Your platform can have transitional steps because it's pointing to the statement of principles. So as long as it doesn't outright deny the statement of principles, the platform can have baby steps. And people make a grave mistake, particularly new people, when they look at our platform and they think that's the ultimate position. For instance, and I'm going to, if I have time, you're going to need to let me know.
You've got about 10 more minutes.
Oh God, I won't have time. Well, you might want it when I tell you we're going to get to it. That's okay. Like people will point to our platform and say it says only get rid of the income tax. And people will state that that's all we want to get rid of. No, it isn't. I can prove it, and that's what I want to do if I had more time, but we'll see. I got a whole thing to prove you that from the very beginning, the party held that the abolition of all taxation. It's easily provable from the beginning platform to the end platform. Drives me crazy when people deny that. So, as stated to me by D. Frank Robinson, the statement of principles is the star around which any number of satellite issues can revolve, collide, or be flung away. And our present preamble makes that clear, because our present preamble says these policies are not our goal. Our goal is nothing more nor less than a world set free in our lifetime, and it is to this end we take these things. So, when you see things in the platform, that's not necessarily the end goal. It's to work towards the end goal. We explicitly say that isn't our end goal. It's just the roadmap along the way. So at this point, I can either take questions or I can do my taxation as theft thing. So that is completely up to your former chair. So you can yell at him. So what is your pleasure, Mr. Perry?
Second. Taxation is theft. Yeah.
Theft.
Taxation is theft.
Okay, here we go. And now, with all this education I gave you on how to interpret the platform, the statement of principles, the history, whatever, let's apply it to a specific issue, the issue of taxation. Boo. Please boo. Taxation as theft was formally resolved by the delegates at the 2016 Party Convention. Some of you may remember. I have a snippet here because this friend of ours did it. Jim Fulner, Michigan, moved that we adopt the following resolution. Be it resolved, taxation is theft. Following debate, the resolution was adopted by a voice vote. For some reason, I just get the biggest kick out of it. Just the clinical nature of the way that is. Following debate. I was there. There was a lot of hooting and hollering. Resolutions aren't the platform, but they are an official statement of the organization. And the bylaws required thresholds and review are exactly the same. A 2/3 vote and must conform to the statement of principles and can be appealed to the Judicial Committee. This was not appealed to the Judicial Committee. There are some who argue that our current platform does not take the position that taxation is theft and that this was some kind of, revolutionary, radical, mob at convention that pushed this through. No matter how you feel about our past ticket, I'm not getting into that, but I think you'll agree that if we had a revolutionary radical mob at convention, Carol probably would have been the nominee and not our current one. So it obviously was not resolved by a bunch of radicals. It was typical libertarians. It was your everyday libertarians that passed this. But I challenge the statement that our current platform doesn't already make that statement. So we've got to prove it the same way we did before, through a historical document autopsy. So if you go to figure 16, you will see the 1972 platform plank on the economy, which mentions taxation. And you will see it will only mentions the reduction of taxes. So does that mean in 1972 that they did not believe that all taxation is theft? No, because later on in the platform, if you go to figure 17, we used to have something called long-range goals. And if you notice something there, and I kind of wish we had this on our platform now, the platform recognized that there's a need to deal immediately what reality, what presently exists. while still recognizing there are long-term goals. And what does it say is a long-term goal in 1972? The eventual repeal of all, A-L-L, all means all, taxation.
Yes! Absolutely.
It gets better. Not much better than that, but it gets better. Why? It did us the favor of telling us why they believed that. So you can't just say this was just some weird quirk of some 1972 nutballs that, didn't know what they were doing. It says they hold to the eventual repeal of all taxation since we believe that every man is entitled to keep the fruits of his labor. That statement should be familiar to you because it comes from the statement of principles. So the very same people who wrote the damn thing told us what they meant by every man should keep the fruits of his labor. They meant the eventual repeal of all taxation, not just income taxation. I would hope that we do hold to authorial intent and that the people who wrote something probably knew what they meant by it. And that is what they meant by it. Whenever you see entitled to keep the fruits of his labor, it's not just talking about your job. It's talking about all of your fruits. Everything that comes from your body and from your life and from your property. And any forcible collection of that is in violation of rights. This did not apply solely to the income tax, as the plank went on to make it clear to say all taxation. And it goes on to describe a voluntarily funded government. There are some people who try to make taxation as theft, get rid of all taxation, an anarchist issue. It is not. By far, in 1972, the majority of the party, probably 90%, were minarchists. They are the ones who wrote this. They believed that. This was not an anarchist issue. It was just a non-coercive issue. So don't let people tell you that either. It's a minarchist issue as well. David Nolan completely held to that. So in 1974, this statement about the eventual repeal of all taxation was moved up to the primary plank with the same justification of every man being entitled to keep the fruits of his labor. Now in 1976, if you look at figure 19, you will see it still talks about all taxation, but then singles out the income tax. That was never considered, though, to be a separate position. Why was the income tax singled out? It was because it was the conviction of David Nolan in the early party that you're not going to be able to get rid of everything at once, and that some taxes were worse than others, but that the worst possible tax was a tax on productivity, i.e. the income tax. So that's why they singled it out for special approbation, not because that was the only tax they wanted to get rid of. But if they had their way, though the early party was no particular orderist, that's a whole other thing, but if they had their wish list, they would get rid of income tax first. That's why it was singled out, not because that was the only tax they wanted to get rid of. So, if you come forward now to our current platform, which is figure number 21, it says, all persons are entitled to keep the fruits of their labor. We call for the repeal of the income tax, the abolishment of the Internal Revenue Service, and all federal programs and services not required under the U.S. Constitution. We know what the phrase, all persons are entitled to keep the fruits of their labor, means, what it has meant since 1972 when it was put into the Statement of Principles. It means all taxation. It is singling out income tax because it's the worst. It's the worst, and we should kill it in a fire first. That's why it's there first. All right. So, let's see here. David Nolan said about the income tax, in an ideal world, there would be no taxation. Doesn't sound like he thought there should be some. In an ideal world, there would be no taxation. All services would be paid for on an as-used basis. But in a less than ideal world, some services will be financed for the foreseeable future, but not all taxes are equally deleterious, and the worst form of taxation is a tax on productivity and income tax, and no libertarian ever supports that kind of taxation. That was David Nolan. So, done with that. So I hope now I at least provided a convincing case that our current platform does in fact still call for the repeal of all taxation. it just hides it a little bit, which I think is dishonest, and that we should come out and say it. Because again, I think new people get mad when they find that out. They feel like they were sold a bill of goods, and I don't blame them. When we're asking people to join a peaceful revolution, I think they should know what it is that they're joining. So I hope you found this tracing of party history and methodology and ideology helpful. I hope that this can guide future discussion of the relationships of principles to current situations, of transitional, dealing with reality, ending the stupid fight between monarchists and anarchists. We're a small movement so far, and we are going in a different direction. The direction is the world set free in our lifetimes, and also where all human interactions are free of force and fraud. And while some of us do see that as a completely voluntary society, including competitive services for all services of governance, others will stop shy of there. But the original vision of the formative years of this party that has held true for 4 decades is that we are all headed in the same direction. If we're going to succeed and thrive, we must recognize this. And I think that is encapsulated in these words that moved me on September 7th, 2014. Yes, I do know the day. And it's what our bylaws declare. Our bylaws declare that the statement of principles is the philosophy upon which the Libertarian Party is founded, by which it will be sustained, and through which liberty shall prevail. Yay.
You can take a couple.
Any questions from anyone? It could be about the history, about secretary, it could be about pretty much anything I know anything about. Yes, sir.
Do you have any idea what the attendance was at the 74 convention?
74, I don't have that off the tip of my head. I could guess, I think it was about 110.
Okay, thank you.
That's a guess, but I can get you the exact number. It was 80 and 72, and they did grow, so I think that's probably a good estimation. I have the audio from the 74 as well. But by the way, the 1974 convention, they were really frugal. They hand-wrote their minutes, obviously, because there's no computers, but they decided they weren't going to use fresh paper. They used extra copies of press releases. And the press release was, "Libertarians call for the abolition of all taxation." Daryl?
Will the Harlos family ever be moving to New Hampshire?
No, the Harlos family will not be moving to New Hampshire. I love Colorado. And, 4,000 feet mountains, that's really cute, but...
Thank you for coming and kind of giving us a snapshot of kind of how this party has grown from the 70s. I've learned a lot tonight, to be honest with you. I'm still new to the party, but I didn't know the actual history of how everything was formulated. So with your knowledge of the history, what is leading you to run for the position that you're running for now?
We're running for secretary. Thank you for asking. I didn't even plant you to ask that. I'm going to bring you to all the conventions.
I want to know.
Yeah. As you can tell, both my professional experience as a paralegal and the type of paralegal I was, working on sometimes multi-million-dollar cases with 70 things of boxes, is I'm an archivist, educator, categorizer type person. Some people call me, the libertarian librarian. And I actually think that is somewhat of a role of the party secretary. They're there to keep the records in line and the procedures in line, and to be able to be a friendly reference that anyone could go to find out this information. So when they want to know something that happened in the past, or a procedure, or whatever, that it's kind of the academic person that they go to. And being a paralegal, I think, also set me up for this. As a paralegal, you do almost all the work of the lawyer, and they just sign their name on it. Anyone who's a lawyer knows that. But what it is that you're the inward person that's making the outward-facing person look good. To me, the ideal secretary will equip the LNC to the point that the chair and the vice chair can look good. They're taking care of the internal foundational struggle. And I've been a very much an in-reach person. I like doing outreach, but I find that my talent is in in-reach. Some of you may have seen my YouTube video series on it. Hey, so you want to be a national party delegate but don't know how. And I have a way, hopefully, you know, most people who think they're funny aren't, so maybe I'm not. But I think I have a way of making very dry material funny. And I did that with the national delegate things. I had this great thing with Roberts with some candles and religious music. It was quite awesome. But that's how I see myself, as an internal educator. I think it's more than just the minutes. Nobody is running against me yet, but I anticipate the incumbent will run. The incumbent is a phenomenal secretary. Most people don't say that about their challenger. And I actually had somebody say to me, do you really want this position? Why are you saying nice things about your the person who will be running against you? Here's the fact. I'm an awesome secretary. Alicia's an awesome secretary. We are evenly matched on all the core competencies. So the decision will need to be made on other grounds. And it's the extras that each of us bring. I'm a huge advocate for transparency. I'm a huge advocate for internal party education, going to conventions, talking to people, more of a human connection rather than just an official body. And I'm an advocate for giving the power back to the affiliates and away from the LNC. She and I differ on that.
Okay, everybody here knows that you've been traveling around a lot. How many conventions have you been to, and how many more are left before NOLA?
You know, I don't count that. It's like, you're gonna laugh, but I only know now because I'm the big 5-0, but I never kept track of how old I was. You would have to like count back because it's not important to me. I only look at what's next. My next step is Indiana. I've been to a lot. I'm going to California tomorrow. That's gonna be fun. That's a big trip. And I've got conventions every weekend, I think, except for 2 in June, and I might have filled up some things there. So when I decided to run, I was in it to win it and decided to go. But hey, it doesn't matter. Wherever I go, I sign up members. That's like my big yes.
Are any of these old audio recordings going to be made available?
Yeah, I'm playing you next time, too. My Daryl's about to shut me up. All of this, as you know, I'm the chair of the Historical Preservation Committee. All of the records now somehow have ended up in Colorado. How did that happen? And half of them are in my house, and my husband's like, oh, righty then. There is a resource called LPedia. It's like Wikipedia, but just for Libertarian Party stuff. And we don't have those draconian notability requirements like, you have to be, famous for whatever. Actually, Wikipedia won't let me edit the article on the Statement of Principles because I'm somewhat of an expert on it.
No independent research.
It was like, whatever. I just don't do Wikipedia anymore. But LPedia, if you were a libertarian for 1 second, you're notable. Get an entry on LPedia. All of you go to LPedia and make your entries. You are a living part of Libertarian Party history. Make your entries. You know something that other people don't know. Make your entries. Scan this brochure from your convention this time and get it up there. Scan your minutes and get it up there. There are so many fantastic things on LPedia. So those recordings are on LPedia. If you go to the 1972 and 1974 convention entries, they're uploaded and up there. We have a ton of recordings. They're in my basement right now, but we've just converted 1970s McBride footage that was these 2-inch quadruplex reels that only one person is still doing it at the Museum of Broadcast History, which is really just a bedroom in this guy's house. But we found them, and one of them fell apart after he converted it. This literally was the last year this project could be done. We've got all of David Nolan's private archives. I befriended his widow, Elizabeth Nolan, who just felt that the love that I have for the history. She wouldn't give these to anybody else, but she really felt like David was guiding me. But here's what's interesting. I also found Susan Nolan. No one knows what happened to her. She was our first chair. And when they divorced, no one knew. It turns out she's still in Denver and she wants to talk to me. So that is pretty fantastic. I mean, if you're into the woo, I'm a little bit into the woo, I do feel like there's a bit of a guiding hand. So yes, everything will end up on LPedia.
So because you just mentioned the guiding hand, I'm kind of curious, like, do you still consider yourself an evangelical Christian?
I'm still a Christian. I wouldn't, and the word evangelical has been twisted, just like the word fundamental has been twisted, so probably not. I would consider myself a liberal Christian at this point. You know, I used to be very, very strident on some things that I just don't believe anymore. But I'm definitely still a Christian, but not that kind of ones that most people don't like.
Looks like there's one more question.
Yes.
I served on the platform committee a few times, including with George Squires, and I'd be happy to explain the benefits of an accordion platform in a menu-driven information society today, some other time. But one of the notable things about that is that we took a lot of things out of the platform that, in my mind, should be in a program. So we don't have to keep editing the platform every year about Lagrange points, or if we've already achieved some goals in there. So we used to have this separate document called the program, and that could work for any level from county to state to national. We ended up getting rid of that, I think partially because the bylaws said we would take the program of our candidate, and we didn't always agree with our candidates' programs. What do you think about bringing back program as a complement to the platform?
I'm on the bylaws committee this year as well, and I actually proposed bringing back the program. And I got a lot of pushback on it. I'm actually considering agitating from the floor for it, because I think I've devised the way that everyone can win, where the radicals can win and the moderates can win.
Right, the program is what do we want to do
Right.
next? The platform is our
Yes, I think if we brought those two back, we'd have peace in the party. Let the platform be, most people don't read a platform.
I talked to David Nolan at his last convention, and he said all the stuff that got taken out of the platform, yes, let's put it back in the program.
Yeah, and have the program be with the candidates use that are the steps, the transitional steps.
Yeah.
Let the radicals have the platform.
Yes.
And have the practical, pragmatic, moderate-minded people with the program. Everyone can win. But the problem in our party is we are not like that. We have to win it all. They can't have anything. It's a zero-sum game, and it is dumb.
Caryn.
Get a hug time, you know? I want my drink.
Caryn, give her a big, huge round of applause.
We'd like to invite you to visit freekeen.com. Freekeen.com features audio, video, and blogs chronicling the transition to a voluntary society. Freekeen.com also has comments and discussion forums so you can be heard. Freekeen.com.
I should be in Keene, New Hampshire with the Free Staters.